Continental Union Telegraph Company, telegram, sent by D.N., received by L.F., time 9:45 a.m., date October 10th, 1884, Utah Central Railway Station, Frisco, Utah Territory. To Mr. Matthew Hickman. Matt, White Widow strikes again. Frisco citizens satisfied Miss Moore is innocent. She is free to take her dress business back to her shop and leave me in peace. Thank the good Lord for that. Sam. September 15th through October 3rd, 1884. Been sleeping in some real interesting places lately. Spent a night down at John Lee's Ferry. It's on the banks of the Colorado. I paid Mrs. Emma a visit for a bit before turning in. She's given me an open invitation to stay in a sort of covered corral she's got if ever I'm passing through. If it's not too late when I ride in, I try to stop in and say hello to her. I feel sorry for the good lady. Must get real lonely out here since her husband was executed in '77 for his part in the Mountain Meadow Massacre. Makes me think of Mama being out in Texas alone. And I'll admit I worry for Mrs. Emma. But she's tough as nails. Real nice lady and a mighty fine cook, especially after eating mostly trail food the past several months. Told me I needed fattening up, so she fed me supper. I repaid her by chopping a big old pile of firewood for the winter and confiding in her about Lily Clara and my intentions where she's concerned. Mrs. Emma's advice was to stop wasting time waiting for the right moment, or your sweetheart will end up being someone else's. After reading Lily's fine praise of Sam, curse the handsome devil, I'm beginning to think Mrs. Emma might be right. I left Lee's Ferry and traveled 85 miles northeast until I lost the trail of the stars in a canyon. Back in June, I thought they were leading me into Navajo territory, but instead, I picked up their trail west of the reservation. Then they started heading north again. Not sure if they were waiting for me to run out of supplies or what, but after 3 months of chasing them through canyons, over rivers, and along mountainsides, I'm relieved they finally decided to make a move. I picked their trail back up on the western border of Navajo country. Before heading after them, I decided to get a good night's sleep. I set up camp under this interesting arch here. They've got some of these beauties all over Utah territory. Unfortunately, I also had 3 unwelcome bedfellows join me in my camp around midnight. Snakes aren't my favorite reptilian creatures, and with good reason. Rattlers are a dime a dozen out here. Sam told me once during our ranger days that rattlesnakes taste just like chicken. I was tired and hungry enough from all the riding. I decided to try one for myself. Turns out, Sam's a downright equivocator when it comes to culinary delights. Last place I stayed before heading deep into Navajo land was in an abandoned hogan on the edge of the reservation. Right cozy it was, too. October 15th, 1884. Dear Miss Moore, Boy, was I relieved to get Pearson's telegram. I'm not sure if I should say this, but I'm mighty glad the White Widow struck again. Of course, only because it proved your innocence. You've been on my mind real steady-like since I first heard about your imprisonment. I can't tell you how many times I wanted to jump ship where the stars are concerned and head back to Frisco to bust you out of jail and take you away from there for good. I'm glad I didn't, though. Running away from problems is never the answer. Pearson's a great lawman, and I knew he wouldn't let any harm come to you. Besides, it looks like he's got a lead on something that just might get Gambit off your back once and for all. If only I could get a lead of my own where the stars are concerned. I finally caught up to them again after a few days' ride past the Escalante Mountains. I knew I'd wandered into Navajo territory when I started seeing large sandstone spires and buttes jutting out of the earth like great stone giants across a desert sky. The Navajo consider this place sacred, a place where nature and spirit can find sanctuary. After riding through it on my own, I can see why. I sure wish you could have seen it at sunset, Miss Moore. I've never seen anything like it in all my wanderings. I've ridden through a lot of fine country over the years, but never through these peculiar rock formations, and never at sunset. I don't know any tracker who is comfortable riding into Indian territory, alone or otherwise. I'm no exception. However, I've had successful dealings with the Navajo before. I got acquainted with a few scouts under the command of Lieutenant Henry Wright during the Indian Wars. The 9th Cavalry helped us fight off Victorio and his Apache braves back in '79. That's where I met Escuito. A plan for catching the stars struck me when I realized where they were leading me, and I decided to pay my old friend Escuito a visit. I caught up with him and a band of braves while they were patrolling the northwest border of the Navajo territory. I was taking shelter in an abandoned hogan. I told him of the predicament I was in, and that the stars would bring bad medicine to his people if he didn't help me catch them. He did just what I expected and refused me. Didn't seem concerned with whatever danger 3 women could pose to his people. However, he began to listen when I showed him the Stars Wanted poster. At first I thought it was just because he was dazzled by their fine looks. He asked why I was chasing them, and if it was because I wanted one of them as my squaw. I told him I had someone else in mind for that, and my only interest in the stars was to see justice done. When I told him what they'd done in Chicago, Escuito finally agreed to help me. After I shared my scheme with him and his braves, we headed out in search of the stars' camp. It didn't take long to find, as the stars didn't seem to be trying for discreetness. They were camped at the base of one of the giant sandstone spires. It was dusk when we rode into their camp. I could see their fire a mile away and felt confident this plan would finally work. Well, Miss Moore, that should have been my first clue to hightail it out of there. But my mama didn't raise a quitter, so keep reading. But don't judge my foolhardiness too harshly. When we rode into camp, Escuito's braves stayed out of sight in order to surround the stars. All 3 ladies welcomed us with as much southern hospitality as one can muster in the barren desert. I told them why I was there, and that I'd ensure no harm would come to them if they turned themselves in. They tittered all polite-like, but said they had no intention of coming back to Chicago, where they were sure to hang. I told them Escuito and his braves had a fate much worse than hanging in store for them if they didn't clear out. Right on cue, Escuito demanded the Stars leave and said he was only extending the courtesy of allowing them to depart unharmed because of my friendship with them. Escuito and his men played their part well. The warriors surrounding the camp began to move in on the sisters. When the ladies still refused to surrender, Escuito took out his knife and made to come after them. I stood between him and the Stars, and we had a knife fight. It was harmless, just for show. I needed to demonstrate that the braves meant the Stars harm. A knife fight with Escuito, who's well known all over the territory as a vicious opponent with the blade, seemed the best way to do it. Escuito was supposed to let me win the knife fight, but the double-crossing coyote hoodwinked me. It was only when he had his knife inches from my belly, ready to slash me open, that I realized I, and not the Stars, was being played the fool again. Turns out the Navajo already knew the Stars were in their territory. Turns out the Stars were revered by the tribe due to their help during a smallpox outbreak a few years ago. And turns out they were gifted asylum and safe passage through the Navajo Nation whenever they required it. I'm not a cursing man, Miss Moore, but I'll admit a few choice words crossed my mind just then, especially when Escuito and his braves hog-tied me and began burying me up to my neck in sand. I did put up a heck of a fight, though. They won't be thanking me for the souvenirs I gave them anytime soon. While I was doing my best to look threatening while being buried, Jessamine Starr told me I should feel pretty good about myself regardless. She said I was outnumbered and never really stood a chance, since she and her sisters are considered great healers among the tribe. Therefore, the Navajo would never let any harm come to them at the risk of incurring bad medicine. I asked if this was due to the herbal medicine knowledge their parents taught them. The same knowledge that enabled them to poison Captain Rigby's entire household staff. None of the Stars were too happy I brought up Captain Rigby's name. But it was a good thing I did, because while the ladies were preparing to mount their horses, it caused the oldest belladonna to pause. She looked me straight in the eye as though she was taking my measure. Then she asked Escuito to unbury one of my arms and cut it loose. She also asked him to leave my rig where it was. She then said she was going to give me the chance to escape because she wanted the truth about Rigby uncovered once and for all. She said she'd heard enough about me to think I might be the only person who stood a chance at it. Then the Stars rode off with an escort of Navajo braves. While I dug myself out of the sand and got the rest of the way untied, I kept thinking about what she'd said. It was long after midnight by the time I finally mounted Orion. I knew I was likely to get lost or injured by falling into a ravine if I tried to follow the Stars at night. So I built a fire to keep the wild animals away and waited until morning, still wondering what Belladonna Star meant. My mind was spinning all night. I didn't much like feeling obliged to murderers and thieves for sparing my life, so I decided to start asking myself the hard questions. The questions I think you've been inspiring me to ask myself all along. What if the stars aren't the true villains in all this after all? I won't know the answer unless I do some hard digging into Rigby's background. The other much more important question I thought about all that night was also inspired by you, Miss Moore, but it was much more pleasant to dwell on. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and be a bit unconventional. I've told you several times that I've thought about you during my traveling, and that's true. You've never been far from my mind. But when a man finds himself in the kind of trouble I've found myself in over the past several months, he begins to ask himself those real important life questions. Like, why in the world have I been waiting until I get back to Frisco to ask you to be mine? If you'll pardon me for being so forward, I don't have to wait to see you in person again to know I'm dead gone on you. The truth is, I loved you the moment I saw you fighting off McDonald's man back at the Chicago train station. I knew I wanted to marry you the moment I thought I'd lost my chance to win you. The moment you told me you were about to marry another. When I found out your wedding was off and there was still a chance for us, I was bound and determined to take it. But I wanted you to have time to work through whatever heartache you might have had on account of Gambit. I know he's a scoundrel, but he must have had some redeeming quality that convinced you to accept his marriage proposal. Well, if you have worked through it all, Miss Moore, Lily, if you're ready to give the idea of marriage another go, I'd be mighty honored if you'd agree to be my wife. When this hunt for the stars is over, I have every intention of heading back to Frisco. We can make it nice and permanent then, if you like. Take whatever time you need to think this over. I know it's a lot to take in, and since I've never actually done any proper in-person wooing of you, it may feel awful quick to a lady more accustomed to the Eastern courting ways. All I ask is that you think it over, and that you don't fall in love with Pearson before I get back. Affectionately, Matthew. Matthew Hickman, 1884. While you're thinking over my proposal, hopefully this photograph will help keep me at the forefront of your mind. I know Sam's a mighty good-looking fellow, but I feel it's important you're able to make a proper comparison before making your final decision.